The morning sun was a warm hand on my back, just the way I liked it. My coffee, black and strong, sent a plume of steam into the crisp September air, mingling with the scent of damp earth and the last of the late-blooming roses. My garden was my sanctuary, a small, meticulously curated patch of peace I had carved out of the world. Each bloom of the Mr. Lincoln roses was a tiny victory, a testament to a quiet, orderly life. 72 years I'd waited for this kind of quiet. 72 years to earn this simple, unchanging rhythm: coffee, garden, crossword, and novel by the window. I had been Eleanor Vance for 38 years. The name felt as comfortable as my favorite wool cardigan, worn soft at the elbows. It was a good name, a kind name. The name of a woman who baked for the local church sale, who knew the mailman by his first name, who mourned her late husband, Thomas, with a gentle and respectable sorrow. The woman I had become was a masterpiece of deliberate construction, a fortress built of routine and pleasantries. And its walls were very, very thick. I was just admiring a particularly stubborn weed I'd have to deal with later when the sound shattered my morning. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, panicked hammering on my front door, a sound so out of place in our sleepy cul-de-sac that it felt like a gunshot. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. My heart, a slow and steady drum, gave a painful lurch. People didn't knock like that here. Not ever. Setting my mug down on the porch railing with a hand that was suddenly not quite steady, I moved through my house. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old books did nothing to soothe the sudden, icy unease crawling up my spine. I peeked through the peephole. It was Arthur Finch from next door. His face, usually a cheerful pink, was the color of old parchment. His silver hair, normally combed with military precision, was a wild mess, and his breath fogged the glass. I undid the chain and opened the door a crack. "Arthur? What on earth is the matter?" He didn't answer. He shoved a folded piece of paper into my hand, his fingers trembling and cold against mine. His eyes, wide with a terror I hadn't seen since news reports from a long-forgotten war, darted past me, toward the street. "Eleanor," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "Don't go back in. Just go." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and practically fled, his gait a clumsy, terrified shuffle back toward the safety of his own home. He didn't look back. I stood there for a moment, the screen door hissing shut, the piece of paper feeling heavy and hot in my palm. My first thought was that poor Arthur was having another one of his senior moments. His daughter had mentioned his memory was getting spotty. A prank, perhaps? A moment of confusion? I unfolded the note. The handwriting was a jagged, desperate scrawl. 4 words. They're inside. Run. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, it all faded into a deafening roar in my ears. I slowly backed away from the door, my gaze drifting to the living room window that faced the street. And I saw it. Parked in my driveway, where Thomas's old Buick should have been, was a gleaming black sedan. It was spotless, anonymous, and as out of place as a vulture in a robin's nest. Its windows were tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. That was wrong. All wrong. But it was the flicker of movement inside my house that turned the blood in my veins to ice water. A silhouette, tall and broad, passed by the window. Someone was in my living room. Someone was in my sanctuary. A switch flipped deep in the basement of my soul, a switch I hadn't touched in nearly 4 decades. The gentle, pleasant fog of Eleanor Vance began to burn away, revealing something harder, colder, and much, much older. My breath, which had caught in my throat, steadied. The frantic thumping of my heart slowed, each beat becoming a cold, calculated metronome. They were here. After all this time, they had found us. Or rather, they had found me. My hands, wrinkled and dotted with age spots, curled into fists. These hands had spent the last 38 years pruning roses, kneading dough, and turning the pages of books. But they remembered. They remembered other things. They remembered the cold, unforgiving weight of steel. They remembered the precise pressure needed to silence a threat. They remembered how to be steady. How to be quick. I glanced down at myself. A floral print dress, sensible orthopedic shoes, my favorite gray cardigan. The perfect camouflage. I was a ghost, an invisible old woman. And right now, invisibility was the only weapon I had. I didn't go back for my purse, my phone, or the photo of Thomas I kept on my nightstand. Possessions were anchors, and I needed to be adrift. I backed away from my perfect little house, from the life I had so carefully built, and slipped around the side, into the shadows of the tall hedges that separated my property from Arthur's. Every instinct screamed at me. Move. Disappear. Become no one. The life of Eleanor Vance was over. It had been a beautiful lie. And now, Elara had to run. There is a muscle memory to flight. It's not in the legs, it's deeper, in the instincts that govern breath and stillness. I didn't run. Running is loud. Running draws the eye. I flowed. I moved through the manicured backyards of my neighbors, a gray-haired ghost in a floral dress, keeping to the deep shadows cast by oak trees and privacy fences. The suburban labyrinth that had been my peaceful world for decades was now a grid of cover and concealment. Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias, Mr. Henderson's perfectly edged lawn, they were just terrain. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. Panic was a luxury, an indulgence I had unlearned long ago. In its place was a hyper-awareness that was almost painful. The crunch of gravel under a distant tire, the drone of a lawnmower 2 blocks over, the scent of cut grass, it was all data. My mind, which minutes before had been contemplating the merits of a new rose fertilizer, was now a machine, calculating angles, timing, and risk. I had $164 in a small, concealed pocket sewn into the lining of my cardigan. An old habit. Thomas used to tease me about it. Still carrying escape money, Ellie, he'd ask with a smile, but his eyes always held a flicker of understanding. We were the Vances, yes, but the people we had been before never truly went away. They just slept. I reached the main road at the edge of the subdivision and didn't look back. Looking back is how you get caught. I walked to the bus stop, a stooped old woman catching her breath, and sat on the bench. I was invisible. No one looks twice at an old lady waiting for the bus. They see the wrinkles, the orthopedic shoes, and they dismiss you. They see what they expect to see. It was the best camouflage I had ever known. The bus hissed to a stop, and I boarded, dropping my coins into the machine with a slightly trembling hand, a small, calculated bit of theater. I took a seat by the window and watched my neighborhood, my life, recede until it was nothing more than a blur of green and beige. An hour later, I was on the grimy edge of the city, where the interstate roared and the buildings looked tired and forgotten. I got off in front of a place called the Starlight Inn. Its sign was a masterpiece of faded optimism, the S flickering in a desperate, buzzing plea for attention. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the parking lot was mostly empty, save for a rusty pickup and a sedan with a flat tire. It was perfect. A place for transients and secrets. A place with no memory. The girl behind the counter in the lobby couldn't have been more than 20. She was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light, a bored expression on her features. Her name tag read Maria. A room, I said, my voice a little frail. I was performing now. Eleanor Vance, lost and confused. Maria looked up, her boredom shifting slightly to professional indifference. Just for tonight? I'm not sure, I said, letting my eyes water a little. My car broke down. I'm just waiting for my son to call. A lie. I had no son. Thomas and I had known from the beginning that children were a complication we could never afford. She softened, a flicker of sympathy in her dark eyes. Of course. That'll be $65. Cash or card? Cash, I said, carefully counting out the worn bills from my cardigan. I signed the register as Helen Peterson, my handwriting deliberately shaky. She slid a key across the counter, a real, metal key on a plastic tag, not a card. The place was an antique. Good. Antiques were harder to track. My room was on the ground floor, at the back. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The bedspread was a faded, scratchy floral, a cruel parody of the life I had just left. The air conditioner in the window rumbled like a dying animal. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and jammed the cheap wooden chair under the knob. Only then did I let myself breathe. I turned and faced the mirror above the particle board dresser. For a long moment, I saw Eleanor. A frightened old woman with thinning gray hair and eyes wide with shock. Her face was a roadmap of a quiet life, etched with laugh lines from garden parties and fine wrinkles from years of reading in the sun. She looked frail, lost, and utterly helpless. I felt a pang of pity for her. She had been a good woman. She had deserved to die peacefully in her bed. But as I stared, something shifted. I stood up straighter, my shoulders squaring. The fear in my eyes didn't vanish, but it receded, sinking deep below the surface, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The soft line of my jaw tightened. The gentle curve of my mouth flattened into a grim, determined line. The wrinkles were still there, but now they looked less like signs of age and more like battle scars. Eleanor was gone. The ghost in the mirror was Alara. And Alara remembered everything. I remembered the life before the roses and the crossword puzzles. A life lived in the shadows of European capitals and dusty back alleys in cities whose names I had long since tried to forget. I remembered Thomas, not the gentle, retired accountant my neighbors knew, but the man he had been. The man with quick hands and quicker eyes, who could read a room in a single glance and disappear into a crowd like smoke. We were good at what we did. Too good. And I remembered the promise we made to each other on a rainy night in a Lisbon hotel, the metallic taste of blood still in my mouth. No more, Alara, he had whispered, his hand shaking as he stitched a cut on my arm. We're done. We take what we have, and we disappear. We become boring. We'll be Thomas and Eleanor Vance. We'll buy a house in a town no one's ever heard of. We'll grow old. We'll grow roses. It had been our mantra, the foundation of our new religion. We had performed our roles perfectly for 38 years. We had laundered our pasts until they were spotless. We had almost started to believe the lie ourselves. But the past isn't something you can bury. It's just sleeping. And someone, after all this time, had finally decided to wake it up. Staring at my reflection, I felt a strange and terrible calm settle over me. The fear was gone, burned away by a cold fury. They had taken my home. They had taken my peace. They had shattered the beautiful, quiet life Thomas and I had built on a mountain of secrets. They had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were hunting a frightened old widow. They had no idea they were hunting me. Sleep was not an option. Sleep was a weakness, a state of surrender. In the stale, recycled air of the motel room, I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and listened. I listened to the groan of the building settling, the distant roar of a truck on the highway, the frantic buzzing of a fly trapped against the windowpane. Every sound was a potential threat. Every shadow held a possible enemy. Eleanor Vance would have taken a sleeping pill. Alara catalogued the room's exits. There was one door and one window. The window's lock was flimsy, but it led to a dark, overgrown patch of weeds behind the building. A viable, if undignified, escape route. My life was now contained in the pockets of a single gray cardigan. A set of keys to a house I could never enter again, a handful of cash, and a cheap motel key. It wasn't enough. To fight, I needed more than instinct and loose change. I needed tools. I needed information. My mind, a dusty archive I hadn't accessed in years, began to sift through old files. We had protocols. Contingencies for every disaster, every possibility. We had lived our lives on the assumption that this day might eventually come. Thomas, for all his gentle smiles and love of gardening, had been the architect of our fortress. And he was meticulous. The bag. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. A beat-up leather satchel I used to use for weekend trips years ago. I hadn't seen it in ages. It was in the back of the hall closet, behind the winter coats, collecting dust. But inside its lining, stitched into a hidden compartment, was our last resort. Our ghost kit. The thought was a jolt of pure, agonizing frustration. It was in the closet. Back in the house. With them. I closed my eyes, forcing the panic down. Think, Ilara. He was meticulous. He was paranoid. Would he put all our eggs in one basket? No. Thomas believed in redundancy. There had to be another one. My gaze fell on the old, worn handbag I'd grabbed off the hall table in my hurried, false exit that morning, the one I took to the grocery store. It was a simple, unassuming thing. But Thomas had bought it for me for our 25th anniversary. He'd insisted I use it every day. For good luck, he'd said. It wasn't for luck. It was a go bag, hidden in plain sight. My fingers, clumsy with a sudden surge of adrenaline, fumbled with the lining. There, along the bottom seam, I felt it. A slight thickness. A line of stitching that was just a little different from the rest. Using the tip of the motel room key, I carefully, painstakingly, worked the threads loose. Inside the false bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small, hard bundle. My heart hammered against my ribs as I unwrapped it. It contained 3 things: a tightly wound roll of $100 bills, a set of high-quality lockpicks, and a small, black burner phone. It was an old model, a brick from a bygone era, with no GPS, no internet, nothing but the ability to make and receive calls. A ghost phone. Untraceable. Perfect. I switched it on. The screen glowed with a faint green light, displaying a full battery and a single, cryptic contact saved under the name Helmsman. An old code name. I didn't know who it belonged to now, or if it was even still active. Calling it would be a blind leap into the dark. A risk I wasn't ready to take. Not yet. First, I needed to confirm. To see what I was up against. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number I knew better than my own name. The number to the little beige house with the red door. My home. It rang once. Twice. My breath hitched. On the 3rd ring, someone picked up. There was no greeting. Just a click, and then, silence. An empty, listening silence. Hello? I said, pitching my voice to sound like the confused, elderly Eleanor. Is anyone there? More silence. I could hear the faint, ambient hum of my own refrigerator in the background. My clock ticking. It was a violation so profound it made me physically sick. Then, a voice. It was male, low, and utterly devoid of emotion. Colder than a morgue slab. Who is this? He asked. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. I hung up. My hand was shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. They were in my house, answering my phone, waiting. They weren't burglars. They weren't common thugs. That voice was professional. Patient. He was a hunter, waiting by a trap. My paranoia, which had been a low hum, now screamed. I crept to the window and parted the cheap polyester curtains by a millimeter. The black sedan was gone from the spot I'd noticed earlier. But another car, a nondescript gray sedan, was now parked across the street, 2 spaces down from the Starlight Inn's flickering sign. It was occupied. A silhouette sat in the driver's seat, perfectly still, watching the motel. They weren't just waiting in my house. They were out here, casting a net. How did they find me so fast? Had they followed me from the bus? A tracker on my bag? Or was Arthur? No. I couldn't let my mind go there. Not yet. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Thomas, a few weeks before his heart attack. We were on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His favorite time of day. He'd seemed distracted lately, a familiar tension in his shoulders I hadn't seen since our old life. Everything all right, love? I'd asked, placing my hand on his. He'd squeezed it, but his eyes were far away. Just tying up some loose ends, Ellie, he'd murmured. Something I should have taken care of a long, long time ago. I had dismissed it. Business from his accounting days, I'd thought. Old clients. I hadn't wanted to see the truth. I hadn't wanted to believe our peace was so fragile. Now his words echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy. What loose ends? What had he done? His death certificate said massive coronary artery disease. He died in his sleep, the doctor said. Peaceful. But now, a terrible, cold suspicion began to form in the pit of my stomach. Thomas had been healthier than I was. He walked 3 miles every day. His heart was strong. Was it possible they'd gotten to him first? That his peaceful death was the first move in this terrifying game? The question hung in the stale air of the motel room, heavy and unanswerable. I was no longer just a woman running for her life. I was a widow searching for the truth. They hadn't just taken my home. They might have taken my husband. And for that, there would be no forgiveness. The hunt was no longer theirs alone. It was mine, too. The hunter in the gray sedan was patient, but I was more so. Patience is a virtue of the old. I sat in the darkness of my room for 3 hours, unmoving, watching the sliver of the world visible through the gap in the curtains. I watched him do nothing. He didn't check his phone, didn't shift in his seat. He was a statue, a gargoyle keeping watch. That level of discipline confirmed everything. These were not amateurs. My mind raced, assembling the pieces. They had my house. They had a man watching this motel. This meant they knew I was here, or at least suspected it. Running blindly was no longer an option. That would be reacting. I needed to act. I needed to take back control, even in some small, insignificant way. To do that, I needed to know who my enemy was. And what they wanted. Thomas had always said, every fortress has a weak spot. You just have to find the right person to tell you where it is. Our world, the one we had left behind, was a tangled web of favors, debts, and whispered secrets. It was time to see if any of the old threads were still intact. The burner phone felt like a talisman in my hand. I scrolled to the single contact. Helmsman. It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble. If the number was dead, I had lost nothing. If it had been compromised, I was leading the wolves right to my door. But if it was still good, it might be my only way forward. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, a third time. I was about to hang up when the call connected. There was a click, followed by a full 5 seconds of absolute silence. A test. To see if I would speak first, to see if I was nervous. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest. Finally, a voice came through, a woman's voice, raspy and low, as if it had been aged in whiskey and smoke. It's been a long time since anyone steered by this star. It was a code phrase. My mind scrambled, pulling a response from a dusty corner of my memory. Some of us prefer the old maps, I replied, my own voice hoarse with disuse. Another pause. Then, a dry, humorless chuckle. Ilara. My God. I thought you were dead. Or worse, happy. The voice. I knew it. Time had weathered it, but the cynical, world-weary tone was unmistakable. Lydia. Lydia Grant. She had been our analyst, our eyes and ears, the woman who could pull a ghost from a database and find a needle in a global haystack. She was brilliant, bitter, and she had owed Thomas her life. I was both, for a while, I said, my voice steady now. Things have changed. They always do, she rasped. I'm assuming this isn't a social call to reminisce about the good old days in Berlin. They're in my house, Lydia. They've been here for hours. There's a watcher outside my motel. They're professionals. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the click and whir of data being processed. Describe the car. The man. The voice on the phone. I gave her every detail, my memory replaying the scenes with perfect clarity. The make and model of the black sedan, the impassive stillness of the watcher, the cold, flat cadence of the man who answered my phone. I was a camera, relaying raw data. Black sedan, tinted windows, government plates, probably cloned, she murmured, more to herself than to me. Watcher is disciplined. Primary on the phone is a cold operator. This isn't agency. It's not bureau. This feels corporate. High-level wet work. What did you and Thomas take when you vanished? Nothing, I said immediately. We walked away clean. That was the deal. Lydia went silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, laced with something that might have been pity. No one walks away clean, Alara. You know that. Thomas was a good man, but he was a pack rat. He never threw anything away, especially leverage. Think. What was he working on before? Well, before. His last words echoed in my mind. Tying up some loose ends. He wasn't working on anything, I insisted, but my voice lacked conviction. He was retired. He gardened. He played chess in the park. Bullshit, Lydia spat, the word a crackle of static. Men like Thomas don't just stop. The game is in their blood. He found something. Or something found him. Who is the man outside your door right now? Let me see. The command was absurd. How? The camera on that piece of junk you're holding is terrible, but it's better than nothing. Walk past the window. Be casual. The old lady going for ice. Let me get a look at the car and the watcher. My blood ran cold. Go outside? Into the open? But I trusted her instincts. Lydia didn't take unnecessary risks. My heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I put on my cardigan, smoothed my dress, and transformed back into Eleanor Vance. A sweet, slightly confused old woman. I opened the door of my room and stepped into the humid evening air. The parking lot was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the sodium lamps. I didn't look at the gray sedan. I looked at the flickering ice machine down the walkway, my steps slow and deliberate. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. The man in the car. He didn't move, but I could feel his gaze on me, a physical weight. He was youngish, maybe 35, with a brutal, square jaw and the thick neck of a weightlifter. His hair was cropped short in a military style. He was an instrument, a tool. His name was probably something simple, like Silas or Jack. He was the muscle. I fumbled with the ice machine, my phone held loosely in my other hand, the tiny lens pointed vaguely in the sedan's direction. I scooped some ice into the plastic bucket, turned, and walked back, my body language screaming harmlessness. The second the door was closed and bolted, Lydia's voice was in my ear. Got it. Plates are fake, registered to a defunct landscaping company in Arizona. But I got a partial facial wreck on your watchdog. Silas the Serpent Blackwood. Ex-Ranger, dishonorable discharge. A real piece of work. For the last 5 years, he's been the primary muscle for a man named Sterling Thorne. The name meant nothing to me. Who's Thorne? Head of global security for a corporation called OmniGen, Lydia said, her voice tight. But that's just a title. Thorne is the company's ghost. He cleans up messes. Makes problems disappear. OmniGen is into everything: biotech, defense contracts, private intelligence. They're a shadow government with a stock ticker. If Thorn is after you, Alara, you've kicked a hornet's nest the size of a planet. What did Thomas have on them? The pieces clicked into place with sickening certainty. OmniGen. I remembered Thomas muttering the name a few months ago, an angry, frustrated sound under his breath as he read the financial news on his tablet. He'd said something about them buying up farmland, about their patents on genetically modified seeds. He'd called them leeches. I don't know, I whispered, sinking onto the bed. The scale of this was overwhelming. This wasn't about a ghost from our past. This was something new. Something Thomas had stumbled into right under my nose. Well, you need to find out, Lydia said, her tone sharp, pulling me from the edge of despair. Thorn doesn't just want something back. He wants to erase the fact it ever existed. And that includes you. Your house is a death trap. Silas is your welcoming party. You can't stay there, Alara. You can't go back. You need to disappear again. But this time, you need to dig. She was right. The quiet life of Eleanor Vance was a smoldering ruin. Running wasn't enough. Hiding wasn't enough. They had started this hunt, but I was going to finish it. My grief for Thomas was hardening into a cold, sharp diamond of resolve. They thought they could erase him, erase us. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Where do I start, Lydia? I asked, my voice now as steady as stone. You start where Thomas did, she replied. You find his loose ends. And you pull on them until their whole damn world unravels. The first rule of evasion is to control the narrative. Silas was watching the motel, waiting for me to make a mistake. He expected me to sneak out the back, or make a run for it in a cab. He was thinking like a soldier hunting a fugitive. He wasn't thinking like a helpless old woman in distress. And that was the weakness I would exploit. I picked up the motel phone and dialed the front desk. When Maria answered, her voice laced with late-night boredom, I transformed back into Eleanor. Help me, I rasped, my voice a convincing, breathy panic. I let a genuine tremor enter my words. I can't breathe. My chest, I made a guttural gasping sound and let the phone clatter onto the cradle, but not hang up completely. From the receiver, I could hear Maria's panicked voice. Ma'am? Helen? Are you there? I didn't answer. I just listened. I heard her slam her phone down, the frantic beep 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 of her dialing 911, her voice high and terrified as she gave the address and my room number. Perfect. The cavalry was on its way. Now came the hard part. My body, which had been running on adrenaline and memory, was beginning to protest. My knees ached. A dull throb had started in my lower back. Getting out the window wouldn't be graceful. I waited, counting the seconds, until I heard the distant, rising wail of a siren. It grew closer, a crescendo of manufactured urgency. Looking through the slit in the curtains, I saw the flashing red and blue lights paint the drab motel in strobing, dramatic colors. The ambulance pulled up right in front of the lobby. As predicted, Silas's attention was completely drawn. His car door opened a crack. He was focused on the front, on the two paramedics jogging toward my end of the building with their gear. He needed to see who they brought out. He needed to confirm his target. That was my window. I slid the cheap lock on the window and pushed. It opened with a groan of protest. The air that hit me was thick and smelled of mildew and motor oil. The drop to the overgrown patch of weeds below was only about 4 feet, but it might as well have been 40. Alara, the operative, would have vaulted it without a thought. Eleanor Vance, aged 72, looked at it like a cliff face. There was no choice. I swung one leg over, then the other, my joints screaming in protest. I hung for a moment, my fingers gripping the sill, then let go. I landed badly, my ankle twisting with a sharp, searing pain. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, the coppery taste of blood flooding my mouth. Pain is just information. I filed it away and forced myself up. I was in the deep shadows at the back of the building. Bent low, I half limped, half ran along the back wall, away from the flashing lights, away from the drama I had created. I slipped through a gap in a chain-link fence and found myself in the parking lot of a closed-down diner. The siren was still wailing behind me, a soundtrack to my escape. I didn't look back. 2 blocks away, I hailed a cab, sinking into the cracked vinyl of the back seat. The pain in my ankle was a hot, insistent pulse. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "The public library, downtown," I said, my voice still a little shaky. The library was a sanctuary of a different kind. A place of silence and anonymity. But I couldn't go in as I was. My floral dress and gray cardigan were now the uniform of a woman who had just vanished from a motel. I had the driver drop me off a block away. The roll of hundreds from the go bag felt heavy in my pocket. My first stop was a dusty thrift store. I bought a pair of ill-fitting navy blue slacks, a faded windbreaker, and a pair of flat, ugly walking shoes. I also bought a cheap pair of reading glasses and a silk scarf. In the restroom of a nearby coffee shop, I transformed myself. I scraped my hair back into a tight, severe bun, put on the glasses, and tied the scarf around my neck. When I looked in the mirror, Eleanor was gone. In her place was a different old woman. Sterner, grumpier, someone you wouldn't want to make eye contact with on the bus. Another ghost. At the library, I found a public computer in a quiet corner. My hands trembled slightly as I typed. Thomas and I had a digital dead drop, an encrypted email service based in Switzerland. We'd created it years ago, as a final, paranoid contingency. The password was a 2-part key only we would know. The first part was our anniversary. The second was a phrase, Lisbon rain. A memory of the night we decided to become the Vances, the rain on the hotel windowpane washing the blood and the old world away. My heart pounded as I hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen refreshed. An inbox. It was mostly empty, filled with years-old system tests. But there was one new message. 1. It had been received 3 days before Thomas died. The subject line was a single word, ledger. The body of the email contained no text. Just a single, heavily encrypted data file. I didn't have the software or the time to decrypt it here. I downloaded the file onto a cheap USB drive I'd bought at the pharmacy next to the thrift store. As the progress bar filled, my eyes scanned the vast, quiet room of the library. Every person was a potential threat. The student hunched over his textbook, the homeless man sleeping in a chair, the librarian stamping books. My world was now divided into 2 categories, hunters and cover. The download finished. I ejected the drive, cleared the browser history, and logged out. I stood up to leave, my body stiff and sore. As I walked toward the exit, a movement outside the large plate glass windows caught my eye. A gray sedan had just pulled up to the curb. My blood turned to ice. Silas Blackwood got out of the passenger side. But it was the man who emerged from the driver's side who made my breath catch in my throat. He was in his 40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit. He had silvering hair, a lean, predatory face, and eyes that were as cold and dead as a winter sky. He moved with an unnerving, predatory grace. He wasn't just a professional, he was a master of his craft. This had to be Sterling Thorne. He hadn't seen me. His gaze was sweeping the front of the library, methodical and assessing. They knew I'd run. They were expanding their search grid, and their instincts had led them here. To a place of information. Panic was a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. My training screamed at me. Don't run. Blend. Become invisible. I turned away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I walked calmly, deliberately, toward the library's side exit, the one that led to a busy side street. My limp was more pronounced now, a mixture of real pain and calculated performance. I pushed the door open and emerged into the bright, chaotic afternoon. A bus was pulling up to a stop just ahead. A small crowd of people surged toward it. I joined them, a grumpy old woman in bad shoes, jostling for position. I kept my head down, my face obscured by the flow of bodies. I could feel Thorne's presence behind me, a cold spot on my back. I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was scanning the crowd. I got on the bus, didn't look back, and found a seat. As the bus pulled away from the curb with a hydraulic hiss, I risked a glance out the window. Thorne was standing on the sidewalk, his cold eyes sweeping over the departing bus, over my face. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. There was no recognition in his. To him, I was just part of the scenery. Another ghost. The bus turned the corner, and he was gone. I slumped back in my seat, my body trembling with a toxic cocktail of fear and relief. My hip was on fire. My lungs burned. This was the difference now. The mind was still sharp, but the body was a traitor. 20 years ago, I would have felt exhilaration. Now, all I felt was a bone-deep weariness. But in my pocket, my fingers closed around the small, cool shape of the USB drive. I had escaped. And I had the first thread. Whatever was on this drive was what Thomas had died for. It was what Thorne was willing to kill for. And I was going to find out what it was. The bus rattled and swayed, a cocoon of anonymity hurtling through the city's arteries. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, letting the vibrations hum through my bones. Each jolt sent a fresh spike of pain up my ankle, a fiery reminder of my body's betrayal. Thorne's face was seared into my memory, the calm, intelligent cruelty in his eyes. He hadn't seen me, not really, but he had looked at me. The casual dismissal of an old woman, a piece of urban furniture. That dismissal had saved me. And it filled me with a cold, energizing rage. The USB drive in my pocket was a dead weight, a locked box holding all the answers and all the danger. I couldn't use another public computer. Thorne was too smart, he'd have his people sweeping every library, every internet cafe. They were hunting for a digital trail, and I couldn't afford to leave one. I needed a secure, offline environment. I needed a place Thomas would have built for a day just like this. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from a quiet Sunday afternoon about 10 years ago. Thomas was oiling the hinges on the back door, a small, meticulous task he seemed to enjoy. "You know, Ellie," he'd said, not looking up from his work, "if there was ever a flood, we'd need an ark." I was reading in the garden and had simply smiled. "A flood, Thomas? We're 100 miles from the nearest ocean." He'd finally looked at me, his eyes serious behind his reading glasses. "Not that kind of flood." He wiped his hands on a rag. "I took care of it. A little place. Just in case. Unit 734. Under the name Caspian." He paused. "For the flood that, I hope, never comes." "And if it does?" I'd asked, the book forgotten in my lap. He gave me a sad, gentle smile. "Then you'll know where to go. Hope isn't a strategy, my love. Preparation is. Mr. Caspian. A name from an old, forgotten operation in the Mediterranean. Our little ark. Unit 734. I pulled the cord for the next stop and hobbled off the bus. The self-storage facility was in an industrial wasteland on the far side of town, a place of concrete, chain-link fences, and wind-swept plastic bags. It was a perfect gray desert of anonymity, rows upon rows of identical orange doors. The air smelled of diesel fumes and neglect. Finding the manager's office was easy. The man inside was half asleep in front of a small television. He was overweight, with a greasy ponytail and a faded band t-shirt. He barely grunted when I told him my grandfather, Mr. Caspian, had lost his key and I needed the spare. He checked his logbook, saw the account was paid up in cash 5 years in advance, shrugged, and handed it over for a $10 fee. To him, I was just another person dealing with the forgotten junk of a relative. Unit 734 was at the back of the complex, in a row that saw little traffic. The air was still and quiet. My key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. With a groan of effort, I heaved the corrugated metal door upward. The air that rolled out was cool and dry, smelling of dust and sealed plastic. Our ark. It was small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, but it was a testament to Thomas's meticulous paranoia. Against one wall, neatly stacked, were airtight containers of potable water and non-perishable food. There was a military-grade first aid kit, a small chemical toilet, and a folded cot. And on a small metal desk, sitting under a canvas dust cover, was a ruggedized laptop computer and a small, portable generator. I let the door roll down, plunging the unit into near darkness, broken only by the dim glow of the emergency light I clicked on. The silence was absolute. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt a flicker of something that resembled safety. My first task was my ankle. I cut away the fabric of my slacks and examined the damage in the dim light. It was swollen and a deep, ugly purple. Not broken, I judged, but badly sprained. I found an elastic bandage and painkillers in the first aid kit and tightly wrapped the joint, gritting my teeth against the waves of pain. The relief from the pills was slow, but it was welcome. Then, the laptop. I powered it on. It ran on a closed operating system, a custom version of Linux that Thomas had designed himself. It had no wireless capability, no way to connect to any network. It was a digital island. I plugged in the USB drive. A single icon appeared on the screen, ledger.dat. I clicked on it. A password prompt appeared. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This would be the real test. It would be something only we knew. Not a simple word, but an algorithm, a formula of memory. I thought back to our life, to the two worlds we had lived in. The past and the present. The code had to bridge them both. I typed slowly, deliberately. Finch_Rose_1984. Arthur Finch, our neighbor, the man who had sounded the alarm. The roses in my garden, the symbol of my peaceful life. And 1984, the year we had our operational deaths, the year Alara and her partner vanished, and the Van Cess were born. I hit enter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft chime, the file decrypted. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a document. It was a journal. Thomas's private digital journal. My breath caught in my throat. The entries were dated, stretching back 6 months. He had been investigating OmniGen in secret. It started with small things he'd noticed in the financial reports, anomalies, shell corporations, money being funneled into black box projects. He wrote about their aggressive acquisition of agricultural companies, but noted the research spending was far too high for simple GMO development. He tracked payments to ex-military contractors and logistics experts. He followed a money trail that led to offshore labs in countries with lax regulations. The entries grew more frantic in the final weeks. October 12th, it's not about the patents. That's a smokescreen. The money trail points to something called Project Nightingale. No public record. All internal funding is coded under Advanced Botanical Research, but the equipment requisitions don't match. They're buying gene sequencing machines, CRISPR rigs, neurological scanners. This isn't for plants. October 19th, found a name. Dr. Eris Thorne. Sterling Thorne's father. A brilliant geneticist who was disgraced in the 90s for unethical human experimentation. He vanished from the public eye, but his work, it looks like OmniGen gave him a private playground. My hands were shaking. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the lines of text. Then I saw the last page. It was a list of names. Beside each name was a single-word annotation. Dr. Alistair Reed, molecular biologist, accident, car brake failure. Jenna Oswald, Omnigen whistleblower, disappeared, last seen Bogota. Marcus Thorne, Sterling's estranged brother, journalist, terminated, confirmed. It was a kill list. A list of people who had gotten too close to Project Nightingale. And then I saw the final entry, dated the day before he died. It wasn't a neat, analytical paragraph like the others. It was a single, terrifying sentence, typed in haste. They're not modifying crops, Ellie. They're perfecting a weapon. A neurorecombinant virus. And I think they've tested it. The initial trials, the side effects, they match the early symptoms of rapid-onset dementia. I stared at the screen, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. A cold, horrifying certainty washed over me. Thomas hadn't had a heart attack. His recent forgetfulness, his moments of distraction, his loose ends, it wasn't age. It wasn't stress. They had used it on him. They had murdered my husband, slowly and quietly, right in front of my eyes, and I had thought he was simply growing old. The grief was a physical blow, so sharp and violent it stole the air from my lungs. But beneath it, the cold fury began to burn. This wasn't just about my stolen life anymore. It was about Thomas. It was about a debt of blood. Thorne hadn't just taken my husband. He'd used him as a lab rat. I closed the laptop. The quiet darkness of the storage unit felt like a tomb. But it was also a womb. Eleanor Vance was dead and buried. What was left was Alara. And Alara now had a name for her enemy, a reason for her war, and a ledger full of secrets. The hunt had just begun. The sterile, silent dark of the storage unit was a pressure cooker for grief. With the laptop closed, there was nothing but the throb in my ankle and the image of Thomas's gentle smile, now tainted by the horror of his last days. The ledger hadn't just told me how he died, it had shown me the cruelty of how he was erased, his brilliant mind slowly, deliberately dismantled by an invisible poison. They had made him a ghost before he was even dead. Rage is a potent fuel, but it burns hot and fast. Vengeance requires a colder fire. I had the what, Project Nightingale. I had the who, Sterling Thorne. But I didn't have the how. How could one old woman, armed with a sprained ankle and a dead man's secrets, wage a war against a corporate titan like Omnigen? The answer was Lydia. But I couldn't just call her again. I needed a face-to-face. I needed to show her the ledger. More than that, I needed to look her in the eye and see if the cynical, bitter woman on the phone was still the ally I remembered. But before I could reach out to the past, I had to deal with the present. The laptop in the unit was a fortress, an offline vault. To do any real digging, to follow the trails Lydia might find, I would need a clean machine, one that could connect to the internet and then be destroyed. I couldn't buy one. My face, however aged, was now a liability. Silas and Thorne had seen it. They would be looking for an old woman making unusual purchases. I needed a proxy. An innocent. My mind immediately went to Maria. The young, kind-faced girl at the motel desk. I felt a sharp, twisting pang of guilt. To involve her was to endanger her. It was a line Thomas and I had sworn never to cross. We had kept our quiet world separate from our violent one. But my world was no longer quiet, and I was out of options. Survival, and now vengeance, had its own cruel morality. I found a payphone, a rust-streaked relic from another time, outside a laundromat. I dialed the Starlight Inn. Starlight Inn, Maria speaking. Her voice was tired. Maria, I said, my voice low and urgent. This is Helen Peterson, from room 12. I need your help. I'm in terrible trouble. There was a confused silence. Mrs. Peterson? The paramedics said you'd left, they thought you'd had a panic attack and wandered off. Are you okay? The police were here. I'm not hurt, I said quickly, but I can't explain on the phone. The people I was running from, they're dangerous. I left in a hurry, and I need something. I can pay you $500 for an hour of your time. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with her fear and hesitation. I could picture her, standing in that shabby lobby, looking over her shoulder. I was asking her to step into my nightmare. I don't know, she stammered. The police said. The police can't help me, I cut in, my voice softening. I was playing on her sympathy, and I hated myself for it. You were kind to me, Maria. I have no one else to ask. Please. It's just a simple errand. It's not dangerous for you. I swear it. Another long pause. I heard her take a shaky breath. 500? In cash, I promised. She agreed. I gave her the instructions: go to a specific big box store, buy a specific model of mid-range laptop, pay with the cash I would leave for her at a bus station locker, and leave the laptop in a different locker. She was not to use her own name or credit cards. The transaction was to be as anonymous as a ripple in a pond. She sounded terrified, but the promise of the money, a small fortune for a girl working a dead-end job, was stronger than her fear. The hook was set. The guilt tasted like ash in my mouth. Next, Lydia. I used the burner phone. What, she answered, foregoing any pleasantries. I need to see you, I said. Negative. Too risky. We communicate like this. Not for this, Lydia. I have something you need to see. Something Thomas left. It's big. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear the faint hiss of her smoking a cigarette. Where? The Atherton bookshop. On 6th. The rare manuscripts room in the back. Noon tomorrow. It was a place we had used once before, decades ago. A dusty maze of forgotten knowledge, quiet and filled with shadows. A place for ghosts to meet. Don't be late, she said, and hung up. The next day, my ankle wrapped so tightly it felt numb, I made my way downtown. I moved slowly, a hunched figure in a windbreaker, blending into the lunchtime crowds. The Atherton bookshop smelled of old paper and leather polish, a scent that brought a strange, sharp pang of nostalgia. The rare manuscripts room was at the back, past towering shelves of ancient-looking tomes. It was empty. I found a seat in a dark corner, my back to the wall, and waited. She arrived at 3 minutes past noon. She looked older, of course, but the years had not been kind to her. Her hair, once a fiery red, was a faded, brittle-looking strawberry blonde. Her face was thin, and there were deep lines of cynicism etched around her eyes and mouth. She moved with a twitchy, nervous energy, her gaze constantly scanning the room. She was a woman who had lived her entire life looking over her shoulder. She slid into the chair opposite me without a word, pulling a pack of cigarettes from her purse before remembering where she was and shoving it back with a grimace. You look like hell, Alara, she said, her voice a low rasp. You're no oil painting yourself, Lydia. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The life chose us, right? So. This better be good. I'm burning a very safe identity just by being here. What happened to you, after we left? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Her eyes hardened. What do you think happened? You two vanished. Poof. Gone. Left me to clean up the Lisbon mess. The people we were working for weren't happy. They thought I helped you disappear. I spent the next 2 years trading every secret I had just to stay out of a shallow grave. You bought your garden with my life, Alara. The accusation hung in the dusty air between us. We had no choice, I whispered. They were going to terminate us both. We ran to survive. Everyone runs to survive, she shot back. Some of us just don't have a partner to run with. The old wound was open and raw. There was no point in arguing. I slid the new, clean laptop I'd picked up from the locker across the table. Just look. I'd transferred the ledger from the USB drive. I typed in the password and turned the screen toward her. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the first page. Then the second. I saw her expression shift from cynical boredom to sharp focus, and then to something approaching disbelief. She read in silence for 10 minutes, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. When she finally looked up, the personal bitterness was gone from her eyes, replaced by the cold, clear light of professional horror. Project Nightingale, she breathed, the name a toxic whisper. Neurorecombinant, my God, Thomas. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine sympathy. They tested it on him. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Sterling Thorne, she mused, her mind already working, connecting the dots. This is bigger than anything we ever touched. This isn't about espionage or money. This is about a weapon that could destabilize nations, delivered silently, without a single bullet. It makes an assassination look like a handshake. She closed the laptop. The old wounds weren't healed, but they were cauterized by the sheer scale of the threat in front of us. We were no longer two old spies settling a score. We were soldiers who had just seen the enemy's battle plans. All right, Alara, she said, her voice all business now. You were right to show me this. This changes the game. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Your husband left a kill list. Most of these people are gone. But I recognize one name on here that isn't marked as terminated. A journalist. Marcus Thorne. Thorne? I asked, confused. Like Sterling? Lydia gave a grim smile. His younger brother. The family black sheep. A real investigative reporter who hated everything his father and brother stood for. He was looking into Omnigen a year ago, then he went quiet. Dropped off the map. Everyone assumes he was paid off or scared off. She tapped the screen. But Thomas didn't mark him as terminated. That means he thought he was still alive. Still hiding. A new path opened before me. A possible ally. A source. If anyone knows where Omnigen's bodies are buried, Lydia said, her voice a low, dangerous hum, it's him. Find Marcus Thorne, Alara. Find him, and you might just find a weapon to burn Sterling Thorne to the ground. Returning to the cold, concrete tomb of the storage unit felt like coming home. A grim, joyless homecoming. The cot was my bed, the chemical toilet my lavatory, and tins of cold beans my sustenance. This was the stark reality of Alara's world, a world stripped of comfort, of beauty, of the scent of roses. Every time I moved, the sharp pain in my ankle was a brutal anchor, pulling me back from the ghost of who I used to be and reminding me of the frail vessel I now inhabited. The new laptop was my only window to the outside world, a dangerous portal that Lydia and I used with extreme caution. We communicated through a series of encrypted chat rooms, our words appearing and disappearing like smoke. Lydia was in her element, a digital phantom haunting the dark corners of the web. She was slicing through firewalls, bribing data brokers with untraceable crypto, and sifting through the digital ash of Marcus Thorne's life. He went dark 18 months ago, she typed, the words appearing in stark green text on my black screen. Wiped his social media, pulled his articles from freelance sites. Even his byline on his old newspaper's site is a dead link. The man didn't just leave the grid. He tried to erase himself from it. Thorne's work? I typed back, my fingers slow and clumsy on the unfamiliar keyboard. Had to be. Silas Blackwood or someone like him paid him a visit. Gave him the choice, a briefcase full of cash to disappear, or a coffin. He chose the briefcase. While Lydia hunted for ghosts in the machine, I was haunted by a ghost of my own making, Maria. The memory of the terror in her voice was a constant, low-grade fever in my conscience. I had used her. I had dangled a few $100s in front of a desperate young woman and pulled her into the orbit of my lethal world. It was a professional's move, a cold calculation. And it made me feel sick. I had to cut her loose. For her sake, not mine. I took out the burner phone and sent her a text from a newly generated number. Bus station. Locker 218. Combination 15-30-45. Your payment and a bonus. For your trouble. Go home. Forget my face. Forget my name. Don't tell anyone. Your safety depends on it. I left the station before she could possibly arrive. I didn't want to see her face. I didn't want to see the fear I had put there. The price of the laptop wasn't just the cash I'd left in that cold metal box. The price was the small, deliberate sacrifice of another piece of my soul. I was becoming the person I had spent 38 years trying to forget. There was a grim irony in the fact that I had to destroy my own humanity in order to avenge Thomas, the man who had given it back to me. For 2 days, Lydia found nothing. Marcus Thorne was a digital ghost. The trail was ice cold. I spent the time in the dim light of the storage unit, meticulously cleaning the small set of lock picks from my go bag, my hands moving with a long-forgotten muscle memory. I ate my cold beans and drank my bottled water and let the pain in my ankle and the grief in my heart fuse into a single, cold resolve. I was a weapon being sharpened in the dark. Then, on the third night, a message from Lydia blinked onto my screen. I found something. It's thin. A breadcrumb. I leaned closer, my heart starting a slow, heavy beat. He was clever, she wrote. He didn't just erase himself. He left a message for anyone who knew how to look. I was searching for deleted server data, fragments of old websites he'd run. I found one. A blog he kept under a pseudonym years ago. A travel blog. The Wandering Scribe. It was wiped, but the server cache still held echoes of it. Lydia sent me a link. It was a mess of broken images and garbled text, but the posts were still legible. They were travelogues from all over the world. But the last post, dated the day after he officially disappeared, was different. It was titled My Final Destination. The post was short and cryptic. I've seen enough of the world. The noise, the crowds, the endless lies. I'm tired of the flatlands. I'm seeking a higher perspective, a place where the air is thin and clear. Where the ravens speak truths the serpents cannot hear. I'm heading back to the first peak I ever climbed as a boy. My own private sanatorium. Time to rest. It reads like a suicide note, I typed. That's what he wants you to think, Lydia replied. But it's a map. Serpents, that's Silas the Serpent Blackwood. He's telling us who's hunting him. But the key is the first peak he ever climbed. I dug into his family history. Old newspaper articles from his hometown in rural Colorado. When Marcus Thorne was 12 years old, he won a local hiking competition. The final climb was a small, unremarkable mountain just outside his hometown of Aspen Falls. Its local name is Raven's Peak. Raven's Peak. My breath caught in my chest. He's there, Alara, Lydia's text glowed on the screen. I'd bet my life on it. He's hiding in plain sight, in the one place his family would never think to look, a place from a past they probably erased from their own memories. I stared at the words, the name of the mountain a beacon in the darkness. Aspen Falls, Colorado. It was over 1,000 miles away. A journey that, for a woman in my condition, would be an odyssey. But it was a destination. A tangible goal. The first real step toward justice. Thank you, Lydia, I typed. Don't thank me yet, she replied. Thorne is a patient man, but he's not a forgiving one. He knows you're out there. He'll have his people looking for any old woman traveling alone who doesn't fit in. You're injured. You're exhausted. This is a trap as much as it is a trail. I know, I wrote, and the words were a vow. Be careful, Elara. The connection went dead. I closed the laptop and sat in the suffocating silence. Lydia was right. It was a terrible risk. But sitting here, hiding in this concrete box, was a slower kind of death. Thomas hadn't died so I could rot in a storage unit. He had died trying to expose the truth, and I was the only one left to carry the torch. I stood up, testing my weight on my bandaged ankle. The pain was still there, a hot, angry protest, but it was manageable now. It was just another weakness to be ignored. I packed a small bag with the essentials, the burner phone, the lockpicks, the rest of the cash, a fresh bandage, and a tin of beans. The old woman who had wept over her husband's secret journal was gone. The hunter was on her way to the mountain. Stepping out of the climate-controlled stillness of the storage unit and into the humid chaos of the city was like a deep-sea diver surfacing too fast. The noise, the smells, the sheer overwhelming presence of other people was a physical assault. For 3 days, my world had been a 10 by 10 concrete box. Now, the world was rushing back in, and I had to find my place in it, a ghost in the current. The journey to Colorado was a calculated descent into a world I had long since left behind. A plane was out of the question, too many cameras, too many ID checks. The train was cleaner but still too formal. That left the bus. The Greyhound station was a special kind of purgatory, a terminal of quiet desperation. It smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and the faint, metallic tang of regret. Here, I was not an anomaly. I was the norm. The waiting area was filled with other ghosts, young mothers with weary eyes and restless children, soldiers with thousand-yard stares heading home or away from it, and a dozen other women who looked like me, old, tired, and traveling with everything they owned in a single, worn-out bag. I bought my ticket with cash, giving the name Doris. I was one of them. I was invisible. The next 48 hours were a blur of sticky vinyl seats, the drone of the engine, and the endless, rolling ribbon of American highway. I watched the green fields of the Midwest bleed into the vast, sun-baked plains of Kansas. My body screamed in protest. The throb in my ankle was a constant companion, and a deep, unyielding ache settled into my bones. Sleep was a series of brief, troubled naps, my head against the vibrating window, my hand clutching the bag with the laptop as if it were a holy relic. During a stop somewhere in rural Nebraska, the monotony was shattered. 2 state troopers boarded the bus. They moved down the aisle with a slow, deliberate authority, their mirrored sunglasses reflecting the tired faces of the passengers. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs, then settled into a cold, steady rhythm. Perform, Elara. You are Doris. You are going to visit your grandchildren. You are harmless. I didn't look up. I pulled a half-finished knitting project from my bag, a lumpy, misshapen scarf in a hideous shade of mustard yellow. It was a prop I'd bought at the thrift store, a perfect piece of camouflage. My hands, wrinkled and steady, worked the needles with a placid rhythm. Click, clack. Click, clack. The trooper paused by my seat, his shadow falling over me. I could feel his eyes on me. I kept knitting. Ma'am, he said, his voice a low rumble. I looked up, my face a mask of mild, grandmotherly confusion. Yes, officer? Just a routine check. Where are you headed? To Denver, dear, I said, giving him a small, weary smile. To see my daughter and the grandkids. It's been too long. He nodded, his gaze lingering for a second longer than was comfortable, then moved on. I didn't let out the breath I was holding until the bus was moving again, the flashing lights of the patrol car receding in the distance. The woman sitting next to me, a chatty, rotund woman named Agnes, leaned over. Nerve-wracking, isn't it? She whispered conspiratorially. Makes you feel like a criminal just for sitting here. I just smiled and nodded, my needles resuming their steady, silent mantra. Click, clack. I was a criminal. I was a spy. I was a hunter. And I was knitting a hideous yellow scarf while the law looked me in the eye and saw nothing. From Denver, I took a smaller, regional bus that wound its way up into the mountains. The air grew thinner, cooler, and cleaner. The oppressive humidity of the city was washed away, replaced by the crisp, pine-scented air of the Rockies. The town of Aspen Falls was a postcard lie. Quaint storefronts, expensive-looking ski lodges, and streets filled with tourists in brightly colored jackets. It was a playground for the rich, a place of stunning natural beauty that served as a backdrop for careless wealth. It was the perfect place for a man like Marcus Thorne to hide. Who would look for a disgraced journalist in a town that actively discouraged introspection? My new home was the Mountain View Motel, a place whose name promised more than it delivered. My window looked out onto the parking lot and a dumpster, but if I craned my neck, I could see it. Raven's Peak. It wasn't a dramatic, jagged peak like its neighbors. It was older, more rounded, covered in a thick mantle of dark pine trees and aspen groves that shimmered gold in the late afternoon sun. It looked quiet, ancient, and indifferent. It was a silent, stone gatekeeper. I spent the first day watching. I bought a local map, supplies from a camping store, sturdy boots that would support my ankle, a walking stick, a small backpack, water bottles, protein bars. My cover was simple: another tourist, a retiree enjoying the mountain air. I sat in a small cafe, nursing a cup of tea for 2 hours, and listened. I was trying to get the rhythm of the town, to understand its currents. From my motel room that night, I stared out the window at the mountain's dark silhouette against a sky littered with stars. Thorne was up there somewhere. A man living in a self-imposed exile, a man who had chosen a cage of his own making over a coffin. He was the key. He was the weapon. But he was also a wounded animal, and wounded animals are notoriously unpredictable. The plan was simple, brutal, and probably foolish. I would go up there. I would find him. And I would convince him to help me burn his own family to the ground. The preparation was over. The journey was done. The lion was in his den. And a little old woman, leaning heavily on a walking stick, was about to walk right through the door. The trail up Raven's Peak was not for tourists. It was a narrow, winding path, little more than a deer track, that snaked its way through dense stands of aspen and pine. The air was thin and sharp in my lungs, each breath a conscious effort. The walking stick was my third leg, the boots a godsend, but the climb was a brutal, relentless assault on my aging body. My ankle was a dull, persistent fire, and my lungs felt like they were being squeezed in a vice. I was not Eleanor, the gentle gardener. I was not even Alara, the swift operative of my youth. I was something else, the stubborn, grieving old woman fueled by a cold, pure rage. Every painful step was for Thomas. Every gasp for air was a defiance of Thorne and the quiet, sterile death he had engineered. I followed the trail for 2 hours, pushing past the point of exhaustion, until I found what I was looking for. Tucked away in a small, sheltered basin, almost invisible against a rock outcropping, was a cabin. It was small, weathered, and looked as if it had grown out of the mountainside itself. A thin tendril of smoke curled from its stone chimney. I didn't approach directly. I circled, moving through the trees, my steps slow and silent. An old habit, a dance I hadn't performed in decades. The cabin was a fortress. The windows were small, the door was solid oak. There was a stack of firewood, neatly cut and piled. A small solar panel was mounted on the roof. This wasn't a temporary shelter, it was a home. A hermitage. He came out while I was watching. Marcus Thorne. He looked nothing like the pictures Lydia had found. The man in the photos had been boyish, with an easy smile and the sharp, intelligent eyes of a reporter. The man who stepped out onto the cabin's small porch was a ghost. His hair was long and unkempt, his face obscured by a thick, matted beard. He was thin, wiry, and moved with the jumpy, paranoid energy of a hunted animal. He carried a rifle in his hands as if it were an extension of his arm. He scanned the tree line, his eyes sweeping right past my hiding place. He was good. He was alert. But he was looking for Silas Blackwood, for men with guns and cold eyes. He wasn't looking for a 72-year-old woman leaning on a walking stick. I waited until he went back inside. Then I stepped out from the trees and walked, slowly and deliberately, into the clearing. I didn't try to hide. I made sure the sound of my stick crunching on the gravel was audible. I was announcing my arrival. Surprising a man like this was a good way to get shot. The cabin door flew open. He was there in an instant, the rifle leveled, its black eye aimed directly at my heart. "That's far enough," he barked, his voice rough from disuse. I stopped, holding my hands up, palms open, the walking stick dangling from my wrist. I was a picture of harmlessness. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice calm and steady, though my heart was hammering. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I need to talk to you." His eyes, a startlingly bright blue in his gaunt face, narrowed with suspicion. "I don't know any Eleanor Vance. You need to turn around and walk back down this mountain. Now." "I can't do that," I said. "I came a long way to find you. I know about Omnigen. I know about Project Nightingale. And I know what they did to my husband." The name of the project hit him like a physical blow. The barrel of the rifle wavered for a fraction of a second. His knuckles were white. "Who are you?" he whispered, the single question holding a universe of fear. "My husband was Thomas Vance," I said, letting the name hang in the cold mountain air. "Your brother had him killed. He was on a list. A list of people who knew too much. Just like you." He stared at me, his paranoid gaze searching my face, my clothes, my posture, looking for the lie, for the trap. I let him look. I was a 72-year-old widow. My grief was real. My rage was real. And he saw it. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the rifle. "Get inside," he growled. "Before you bring the whole damn world down on my head." The inside of the cabin was sparse, clean, and meticulously organized. It was the home of a man clinging to order in a world of chaos. He gestured for me to sit at a small wooden table while he stood by the door, the rifle never leaving his grasp. I told him everything. I told him about Thomas's investigation, about the ledger, about the black sedan in my driveway, and about the cold, dead-eyed man named Sterling who was running the show. I didn't tell him about my own past. He didn't need to know about Alara. He needed to trust Eleanor. He listened without a word, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the cabin. "You're a fool for coming here," he finally said, his voice flat. "Sterling doesn't leave loose ends. If he's hunting you, he'll find you. And he'll find me. He will find us anyway," I countered, my voice rising with a passion I hadn't felt in years. "You can't hide up here forever, Marcus. They poisoned my husband. They are developing a weapon that can erase a person's mind, and they are doing it in secret. Are you going to let them get away with that? Is this what your life's work as a journalist has come to? Hiding on a mountain while your brother builds a silent, invisible apocalypse?" My words hit their mark. I saw a flicker of the old fire in his eyes, the righteous anger of the reporter he used to be, buried under layers of fear and resignation. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Everything you have," I said, leaning forward. "Every piece of evidence you gathered before you ran. Every source, every contact, every whispered rumor. Thomas's ledger is the what. You are the how. Together, we can build a case so damning that not even Omnigen's army of lawyers can bury it." He was about to answer when a sound from outside made us both freeze. The sharp crack of a twig breaking. It was too loud for a squirrel, too deliberate for a deer. Marcus's face went pale. He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. His body went rigid. "They're here," he breathed, a sound of pure terror. I looked. Through the trees, I saw them. Two figures, moving with practiced, tactical silence. One was big and broad-shouldered, Silas Blackwood. The other was tall, lean, and wore an impeccably tailored dark coat, utterly out of place in the wilderness. Sterling Thorne. He had a small, handheld device, a tracker. My blood ran cold. The burner phone. Lydia had warned me. It was untraceable for calls, but its signal could be triangulated if it was on for too long in one place. My long bus ride, my stay at the motel, they had picked up the trail. I had led them right to him. My God, I whispered, the guilt a suffocating wave. It was me. I led them here. Marcus didn't have time for blame. He was already moving, his fear replaced by a desperate, feral instinct to survive. Back room. There's a loose board under the bed. A crawl space. It leads out to the rocks behind the cabin. Go. Now. What about you? I cried. This is my last stand, he said, his face a grim mask of resolve. He checked the action on his rifle. I'm not running anymore. Go. Take the laptop. Tell the world. He shoved my backpack into my hands. There was no time to argue. I scrambled into the back room as the first heavy boot hit the cabin door. I heard the wood splinter. I dove under the bed, my fingers clawing at the floorboards until one came loose. The crawlspace was dark and smelled of damp earth. I squeezed into it, my body protesting, just as I heard the cabin door crash open. Marcus Sterling Thorne's voice was calm, almost conversational. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. You've caused us a great deal of trouble. It's time to come home. I heard Marcus's defiant shout, followed by the deafening roar of his rifle firing inside the small cabin. Then, another sound, a silenced, pneumatic hiss, followed by a heavy thud. Silence. I lay in the dark, my face pressed into the cold dirt, my body trembling uncontrollably. I could hear them moving around above me, their footsteps measured and calm. The old woman? Silas Blackwood's voice was a low growl. She was here, Thorne replied. The tracker signal is still strong. She can't have gone far. Find her. And burn this place to the ground. I didn't wait to hear more. I crawled, my nails digging into the earth, toward a faint sliver of light at the far end of the crawlspace. I emerged behind a jumble of rocks, gasping for air, just as the first flicker of orange flame licked up the side of the cabin. I ran. I ran with a strength I didn't know I possessed, my sprained ankle screaming, my lungs on fire. I didn't run down the path. I plunged deeper into the forest, into the untamed wilderness, the roar of the fire and the shouts of the men behind me fading as the ancient, silent trees swallowed me whole. I had the ledger. I had Marcus's final, desperate command. I had failed to save him. But his last fight had bought me my escape. And now, his war was my own. The forest was a merciless sanctuary. It hid me, but it also tried to kill me. I stumbled through the deepening twilight, branches clawing at my face and clothes, the rough terrain a constant, brutal reminder of my body's limitations. The fire on Raven's Peak was a hellish orange glow against the darkening sky, a funeral pyre for a man I had known for less than an hour, a man for whose death I was responsible. His last words echoed in my mind, "Tell the world." I didn't stop until the glow was gone and the moon was high in a sky of polished obsidian. I collapsed at the base of an ancient pine, my body a single, screaming symphony of pain. My ankle was a swollen, useless lump. I was scraped, bruised, and utterly, profoundly alone. The cold of the high-altitude night began to seep into my bones, a chilling, insidious cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of absolute failure. I had found the truth, but what good was it? I was a fugitive, injured and exhausted, lost in the Rocky Mountains. Thorne had won. He had silenced his brother, eliminated the threat, and all he had to do now was wait for the wilderness to finish me off. I huddled in the dark, shivering, my grief a hollow ache in my chest. For Thomas. For Marcus. For the gentle, quiet life of Eleanor Vance. It was all gone, turned to smoke and ash. In that moment of utter despair, something shifted. The cold in my bones was met by a different kind of cold, a familiar, deep-seated frost that I recognized from a lifetime ago. It was the cold clarity that comes after the fire, after the loss. It was the resolve of Elara. They thought I was a frightened old woman. They were right. They thought I was weak. They were right. But they thought I was finished. And they were wrong. I survived the night. At dawn, stiff and frozen, I used my walking stick as a crutch and began to move, not down toward the town, but parallel to it, staying within the cover of the forest. My goal was the highway, miles away. It took me the entire day. Every step was an agony, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. I ate the last of my protein bars, drank the last of my water. I was running on nothing but the fumes of my own rage. By the time I reached the highway, I was a wreck. A wild-eyed, disheveled creature that emerged from the woods. I waited by the side of the road, a pathetic, hitchhiking crone. And then, a miracle. A lumbering, beat-up RV slowed and pulled over. The door opened, and a woman with a kind, wrinkled face and a riot of gray hair leaned out. "Honey, you look like you've been through the ringer," she said. "Where are you headed?" "East," I croaked, my voice a dry rasp. "Anywhere east." Her name was Carol, and she was a retired librarian traveling the country. She asked no questions. She gave me water, a warm blanket, and a bowl of soup that tasted like the finest meal I had ever eaten. I was Doris again, a grandmother whose car had broken down while visiting the national park. She believed me. She was a good person from a world I no longer belonged to. For 3 days, I rode in her cocoon of kindness, sleeping in a real bed, letting my body begin the slow, painful process of healing. I was a ghost, hiding in the life of a stranger. When she dropped me off in a small town in Iowa, I felt a pang of genuine regret. I was leaving a world of warmth and trust and stepping back into the cold. "You take care of yourself, Doris," she said, pressing a $20 bill into my hand. "The world's a tough place." "I know," I said, and the words held a weight she could never understand. From Iowa, I made one last bus journey. Back to the city where it all began. Back to the lion's den. Lydia was waiting for me. We met in a noisy, crowded food court in a downtown mall, the most public and anonymous place we could think of. When she saw me, her mask of cynical detachment cracked. "My God, Elara," she whispered, her eyes taking in my limp, the fresh scratches on my face, the haunted look in my eyes. "What happened?" I didn't tell her everything. I told her Marcus was dead. That Thorn had found us. That I had escaped with nothing but the laptop. I slid the backpack under the table, and she took it without a word. "So, it's over," she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "No," I said, my voice low and fierce. "It's not. What was on this laptop is not for the police. It's not for the agencies. They're too slow, too compromised. Omnigen would bury this in litigation and red tape for a decade. So what's the plan, Elara? You going to walk into Sterling Thorne's office and shoot him?" "That would be a mercy," I said, my voice as cold as a winter grave. "He doesn't deserve mercy. He deserves to be dismantled. He deserves to watch everything he's built burn to the ground, just like he did to my life." I leaned forward. "The ledger, Thomas's notes, Marcus's evidence, it's a weapon, Lydia. And we're not going to give it to the authorities. We're going to give it to everyone." Lydia stared at me, her sharp, intelligent eyes slowly widening as she understood. "You want to leak it. All of it. To every major news outlet, every whistleblower site, every blog that will take it. A data bomb. A global flood, I corrected her. Just like Thomas always planned for. We release it all at once. Project Nightingale. The kill list. The financial crimes. The illegal human trials. Everything. We don't give them time to spin the story. We don't give them time to bury it. We set the world on fire and let them watch their empire burn in the light. Lydia was silent for a long, long time. She looked down at the backpack, then back at me. I saw a flicker of the old fire in her eyes, the same fire I had seen in Marcus Thorne's. The fire of a person who has been pushed too far. It would be the last thing we ever do, she said softly. They would hunt us to the ends of the earth. They're hunting me already, I replied. And you've been looking over your shoulder for 30 years. What's the difference? At least this way, we go down swinging. We do it for Thomas. And for the boy on the mountain. A slow, grim smile spread across Lydia's face. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing to see. A data bomb, she repeated, tasting the words. All right, Ilara. Let's build it. Chapter 12, A New Horizon. The war room was a room at another anonymous motel on the other side of the city. It smelled of stale air and desperation. For a week, Lydia and I worked. We were two old women hunched over a glowing screen, ghosts in a cheap room, building the most sophisticated data bomb of our lives. Lydia, with her crooked, nicotine-stained fingers, flew across the keyboard. She was a virtuoso of chaos, weaving the data from Thomas's ledger and Marcus's files into an undeniable narrative. She built backdoors, created mirror sites, and embedded the files in a dozen encrypted torrents. My job was simpler. I wrote the story. I was no longer Eleanor or Ilara. I was a witness. I wrote about a good man named Thomas who loved his roses and who stumbled upon a secret so dark it cost him his mind and then his life. I wrote about a brave journalist named Marcus who was silenced for trying to tell the truth. I wrote about Project Nightingale, not as a collection of data, but as a horror story, a quiet plague waiting to be unleashed. I wrote it as a warning. When it was all done, we sat in the silence of the room, the finished package glowing on the screen. A single file named requiem.zip. It was a digital ghost, ready to haunt the world. Once we press this, Lydia said, her voice a low rasp, there is no coming back. Not for them. Not for us. There was never any coming back for us anyway, I replied. We didn't have a grand ceremony. There was no countdown. I reached out a wrinkled, trembling hand and placed it over Lydia's. Together, we pressed the enter key. A progress bar appeared. Uploading. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single word confirmed our actions, sent. We had dropped a stone into the deepest, darkest part of the lake. Now, all we could do was wait for the ripples. We didn't have to wait long. We watched it unfold on the motel's cheap television. The first 24 hours were a low rumble of confusion as the data spread through the dark web. Then, a single, brave online news outlet published the first story. Then another. By the second day, it was a firestorm. Omnigen's secret plague. The Thorn Conspiracy. Project Nightingale, a silent apocalypse. It was on every network, on the front page of every newspaper in the world. We watched as Omnigen's stock plummeted into oblivion. We watched as grim-faced government officials held emergency press conferences. We watched as Sterling Thorne, his face a perfect, cold mask of indignation, was led from his pristine office in handcuffs, the cameras flashing in his dead eyes. He didn't look defeated. He just looked inconvenienced. He would never see the inside of a prison. Men like him didn't. But his kingdom was in ashes. His name was a curse. His weapon was now known to the world, and a known poison is a neutered one. It was enough. On the third day, Lydia stood up and put on her coat. Our work was done. I have a new name and a new life waiting for me in Argentina, she said, not looking at me. Lots of old ghosts go there to retire. Will you be safe? I asked. She gave me that grim, humorless smile. Safe? No. But I'll be alive. And for the first time in 30 years, I won't have to look over my shoulder for the old masters. I'll be looking for the new ones. It's a change of scenery, at least. We stood in the doorway of that cheap motel room, two old soldiers at the end of a very long war. There were no hugs, no tears. We had shed all our tears long ago. We were good, weren't we, Alara, she said, the name a ghost on her lips.